Marjorie Blake's crew rolled a gravel truck onto my farm road before sunrise. They tore down my private gate and hammered a community road sign into my fence post. Then Marjorie stepped out in her bright pink suit and pointed her workers straight toward my bridge. She told the neighbors my land had belonged to Pine Ridge Estates for years. What she forgot was that my father built that bridge with his own hands. Subscribe now, because this HOA was about to learn the road was only half the problem. The gravel truck came through my farm entrance, like it had been invited by the dead. Its headlights cut across the morning fog, bright and white against the wet fence posts, and the driver never slowed down when the front bumper pushed my old gate until the chain snapped and dropped into the dirt. Behind it, two men in HOA work vests jumped out with hammers, and before the sun had even cleared the ridge, they were driving a metal sign into my land, like they were planting a flag after a war they had already decided they won. I stood on the porch of Red Hollow Farm with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching dust crawl over the road my father had graded every spring for 32 years. The old dirt lane ran between two split-rail fences, past the hay barn, past the lower pasture, and down toward Mill Creek, where a narrow wooden bridge crossed the water and connected our farm to the back edge of Pine Ridge Estates. It was not a fancy bridge. Quote, it had weathered planks, iron bolts, and scars from tractor tires. But my father, Caleb Mercer, had built it with his own hands after the flood of 1988, and every board in that bridge felt more like family than lumber. My name is Caleb Mercer. I was 48 years old when I came back to Red Hollow for good, though the mirror had been calling me older for years. I had short brown hair cut close, a strong jaw that never learned how to soften easily, and the kind of rough face a man gets from job sites, winter mornings, and not saying much when life takes something from him. That morning, I wore my red and black plaid flannel over a tight gray t-shirt, blue jeans, brown leather work boots, and the same steel wristwatch I had worn on every bridge job I ever supervised. I looked like a man who knew how to fix broken things, but standing there, watching strangers take possession of my father's road, I felt something inside me crack before I ever moved. I walked down from the porch slowly, because anger is useful only when it stays behind your teeth. The gravel truck had stopped near the first bend, where the lane widened by the old cattle gate. Fresh tire tracks cut deep into the damp earth. Orange marking flags had been shoved along the roadside. A roll of yellow survey ribbon fluttered in the wind, tied around my fence like a warning. And there, nailed crooked into a cedar post my father had sunk himself, was a clean new sign with black letters that looked far too official for the lie it carried. Pine Ridge Estates Community Road HOA access only. For a few seconds, I did not touch it. I just stared at those words, while the morning stayed strangely quiet around me. Pine Ridge Estates sat beyond the creek, a polished neighborhood of stone mailboxes, trimmed lawns, white SUVs, and people who liked their nature framed through kitchen windows. Red Hollow Farm had been here long before any of those houses had names, before their clubhouse, before their pool, before their HOA had learned how to charge people for breathing the same air. One of the workers lifted his hammer again, ready to drive another nail into the post. I stepped close enough that he stopped mid-swing. He was a thick man with a shaved head and a nervous mouth, wearing a neon vest with Pine Ridge Maintenance printed across the back. Beside him stood a younger worker holding a clipboard, avoiding my eyes like the dirt had suddenly become interesting. Before either one could speak, a white Cadillac SUV rolled up behind the gravel truck and stopped with perfect confidence in the middle of my road. The door opened, and Marjorie Blake stepped out as if the fog had been waiting for her entrance. She was 40 years old, with short white hair cut to her shoulders, sharp cheekbones, and a bright pink suit that looked painfully clean against the mud. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt, but her face never changed. She had the expression of a woman who had never knocked before entering any room in her life. Raymond Pike climbed out after her, a broad contractor with a sunburned neck, mirrored sunglasses, and a rolled blueprint tucked under one arm. He looked at my fence, my gate, my road, then at me, with the lazy confidence of a man who had already been paid. Marjorie did not look at the broken chain on the ground. She did not look at the splintered gate. She looked straight at me and smiled, like I was a problem she had scheduled for removal. She told me the road had been used by Pine Ridge residents for years, and that the HOA had voted to formally recognize it as a community access road. Her voice was smooth, almost bored, like she was reading from a policy manual instead of standing on private land. She said the road would now serve as an emergency access route, a maintenance corridor, and a resident convenience path. She said any attempt to block it would be considered interference with community safety. I looked past her toward Mill Creek. The bridge sat in the gray morning light, still and narrow, with mist rising from the water beneath it. My father had carried beams across that creek with Tom Avery and 2 cousins from Franklin County. I had been a boy then, standing barefoot in the mud, watching him lift timber like he was building something that would outlast all of us. Now a woman in a pink suit was talking about it like her board had created it with a vote. I told her it was private land. I told her the farm road belonged to Red Hollow. I told her the bridge belonged to the Mercer family. My voice stayed low, but the younger worker shifted back, like he felt the weight of it. Marjorie only gave a small laugh and opened the leather folder in her hand. She pulled out a glossy HOA map with Pine Ridge Estates printed across the top in neat blue letters. On the map, my farm road was drawn as a thick green line, running from the back of their subdivision, over my bridge, through my pasture, and out toward the county road. They had renamed it Emergency Access Route B. That was when a blue minivan slowed behind Marjorie's SUV. A woman around 35, with tired eyes and a work blouse under a gray cardigan, leaned forward over the steering wheel. I recognized her vaguely from town. Grace Nolan. She lived in Pine Ridge, a single mother with a little boy in the back seat wearing a backpack too big for his shoulders. A security guard from the HOA waved her toward my road, like he had the right. Grace looked at the broken gate, then at me, then at Marjorie, and for the first time that morning, I saw doubt move across someone's face. Marjorie noticed it too. Her smile tightened. She raised the map higher, almost performing now, and said residents had relied on this access for years. She said families like Grace needed safe passage. She said men like me could not drag an entire community backward, just because I had inherited old dirt and old grudges. Raymond Pike unrolled his blueprint on the hood of the Cadillac, revealing a plan to widen the road near the bridge, add gravel shoulders, and install HOA-controlled access posts. That was the first moment my anger turned cold. I stepped closer to the map, close enough to see the small notes printed beneath the route legend. Most of it was ordinary HOA language, the kind written to sound legal without being law. But at the bottom, in fine gray print, under the maintenance schedule, one line caught my eye and held me there. Bridge maintenance fee collected annually. The air seemed to leave the road. I looked from those words to the bridge, then back to Marjorie Blake. She was still standing there with her chin raised, proud, certain, untouchable. And in that second, I understood this was never just about a road. They had been charging people for my father's bridge. The first stone hit my porch window just after Marjorie's Cadillac disappeared beyond the ridge. It was not thrown hard enough to break the glass, only hard enough to make me turn. And when I looked toward the road, I saw a Pine Ridge security cart stopped by my fence with its amber lights spinning in the fog like a warning. The guard did not step out. He only raised his phone, took a picture of my house, and drove away as if my father's farm had already become evidence in someone else's case. I stood there a long moment with the HOA map still in my hand, the words, bridge maintenance fee, collected annually burning behind my eyes. Down by Mill Creek, the bridge sat quiet under the pale morning sky, its boards damp, its side rails dark with age. The gravel truck had left deep scars in the road, and the broken gate chain lay in the dirt like a dead snake. I could still see Marjorie Blake's smile, calm and bright and poisonous, while she spoke about community safety, as if stealing a man's road was some noble public service. I went back inside the farmhouse because if I stayed outside any longer, I was going to do something Marjorie wanted me to do. Men like Raymond Pike understood broken boards and heavy equipment. Women like Marjorie understood paperwork, pressure, public embarrassment, and the kind of war that made the victim look unreasonable before he ever had a chance to speak. My father had taught me that a gate can be repaired in an afternoon, but one careless word in front of the wrong people can cost a family land. It spent generations protecting. The house felt colder than it should have. The Dallinges, the Seta, Red Hollow Farm had been built in pieces, one room at a time, with pine floors that groaned under every step and windows that looked out over the pasture like tired eyes. My father's work jacket still hung on the peg beside the back door. His boots were still under the bench, dried mud caked along the soles from the last winter he had fed cattle before his heart finally gave out in the kitchen. I had come home after the funeral thinking grief was the thing I would have to survive. I had not expected a woman in a pink suit to show up and start renaming what he left behind. I crossed the yard to the old equipment barn with the HOA map folded under my arm. The barn smelled of hay dust, motor oil, and wet wood. Afternoon light slipped through gaps in the siding and fell in thin gold stripes across the tractor, the hay rake, the rusted tool chest, and the corner my father had guarded like a secret. There, half hidden behind a stack of feed sacks and an old welding blanket, sat the metal safe he had told me never to open while he was alive. It was not large, but it looked permanent. Dark gray steel, chipped at the corners, with a dial lock worn smooth by years of my father's hand. When I was 16, I asked him what was inside. He had stood right where I stood now, wiping grease from his fingers with a red shop rag, and told me some papers were heavier than iron. I thought he meant money, maybe a deed, maybe something for my mother, after she died. But now, with Marjorie's fake map in my hand, and the words bridge maintenance fee crawling through my mind, I knew that safe had been waiting for this morning longer than I had. The combination came to me before I admitted I knew it. My mother's birthday, August 14th. My father used it for nothing else, because he said important things should only open for the woman who made them worth keeping. The dial clicked once, then again, then the handle shifted with a low metallic breath. Inside were no stacks of cash, no weapons, no family jewelry, just folders. Thick brown folders tied with cotton string. Labels in my father's block handwriting. Road, bridge, county, Pine Ridge, temporary access. My hand stopped on that last one. I pulled everything out and laid it across the workbench beneath the hanging bulb. The first folder held the Red Hollow property survey, stamped by the county, showing the farm road entirely inside Mercer land. The second held the 1988 permit for Mill Creek Bridge, issued as a private agricultural bridge for farm use, livestock movement, equipment transport, and emergency farm access. There were receipts for treated beams, iron bolts, concrete footings, gravel loads, and one handwritten note from Tom Avery, saying he had helped set the west rail after the creek dropped low enough to work safely. Then I found the drawings. My father's bridge plan, folded into 4 careful squares, with pencil marks at the corners and coffee stains near the creek elevation. The lines were simple, practical, strong. He had drawn the thing the way he lived, without decoration and without apology. I ran my thumb over his handwriting and felt the past rise up so sharply I had to lean one hand against the bench. That was when headlights flashed through the barn door. For one painful second, I thought Marjorie had come back, but the car that rolled into the yard was my sister, Lydia's old green Subaru, dusty from the county road. Lydia Mercer stepped out wearing a denim jacket over a cream sweater, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, her teacher's tote still on her shoulder. She was 42, softer around the eyes than me, but with the same Mercer jaw when anger finally reached her face. She saw the broken gate from the driveway. Then, she saw the papers spread across the bench. Her expression changed before she said a word. She came into the barn slowly, as if she were walking into a room where someone had died all over again. I showed her the map Marjorie had handed me. I showed her the HOA's green line over our road. I showed her the bridge fee note. Lydia read it once, then again, and her mouth tightened with the kind of hurt that does not shout because it goes too deep for noise. She told me Dad had fought with Pine Ridge more than I knew. Not loud fights, not courthouse fights, not the kind men in town gossip about over coffee. Quiet ones. Letters he never mailed. Phone calls he ended by staring out the kitchen window. Men from the developer, asking for favors that became habits. HOA board members calling temporary access, neighborly cooperation. My father had let construction trucks cross during the early Pine Ridge build, but only because the county road had washed out, and families were moving in with furniture trucks stuck for miles. He had believed helping neighbors did not mean surrendering land. Then Lydia reached into the folder marked temporary access and pulled out the document that changed the whole morning. It was dated 2004, signed by the original Pine Ridge developer and my father, granting limited construction access over the farm road and bridge for 18 months. The language was plain enough for any honest person to understand. The permission ended automatically when the subdivision's primary road opened. It could not be transferred to Pine Ridge Estates HOA. It could not become a public or community road. It could not be recorded into HOA rules, maps, brochures, emergency plans, or resident access materials. My sister looked at me across the workbench, and for a second I saw fear behind her anger. Not fear of Marjorie. Fear of what Dad had carried alone. Lydia said he used to stand by the kitchen sink after those calls and say that one day they would forget who owned the bridge. She thought he meant the neighbors. Now we both knew he meant the people who would learn to profit from forgetting. A phone buzzed on the bench. Lydia's screen lit up with a message from Grace Nolan, one of the Pine Ridge mothers from her school district. Grace had sent a photo from inside the HOA clubhouse. Marjorie stood at the front of a crowded room in her bright pink suit, one hand raised toward a projected image of my farm road, labeled Emergency Exit B. Raymond Pike stood beside her with a road-widening plan. Under the photo, Grace had typed that residents were being told I was an aggressive heir, blocking their only safe evacuation route. Then came a second message, shorter and colder. They have been charging us a bridge maintenance fee for 11 years. Nobody here knows where the money went. The barns seemed to shrink around me. Outside, the wind moved through the open doorway and carried the distant creak of the damaged gate. Lydia gripped the edge of the workbench while I turned back to the folders, searching faster now, pulling receipts, permits, letters, anything with dates and stamps and signatures. I needed proof not just that the road was ours, but that they knew it was ours when they started charging people. At the bottom of the bridge folder, beneath the original drawings, I found a white envelope sealed with blue painter's tape. My father had written my name across it in the same hard block letters he used on feed bins and fence posts. Inside was one final receipt from 7 months before his death. New decking boards, galvanized bolts, labor paid to Tom Avery's nephew, and county inspection fees for minor bridge repair. The total was paid in full by Harlan Mercer, not by Pine Ridge. Not by the HOA, not by any maintenance fund. By my father, alone. I stood there holding that receipt while Lydia covered her mouth and turned away. For 11 years, Marjorie Blake's HOA had taken money from families in the name of maintaining a bridge they did not own, while my father, dying slower than he ever admitted, had paid to keep that bridge safe with his own hands and his own checkbook. And then, at the bottom of the envelope, I found one more folded page I had not seen at first. It was a letter addressed to me, dated 3 weeks before Dad died. The first line stopped my breathing. Caleb, if Pine Ridge ever comes for the bridge, do not argue at the road. Open the county file first. The sheriff's cruiser arrived with its lights off, and somehow that made it worse. It rolled slowly down the county shoulder, tires hissing over damp gravel, then stopped beside my broken gate, like the law itself had come to inspect the damage before deciding who owned the truth. Marjorie Blake stepped out of the passenger side before Deputy Aaron Cole even opened his door, wearing that bright pink suit like armor, her white hair sharp against the gray morning, her folder clutched to her chest with the confidence of a woman who believed paper became law if she printed it in color. I was already standing at the farm entrance with my father's leather document bag in one hand and a temporary cattle panel chained across the road behind me. I had placed it there before sunrise, not to make a scene, but to stop Raymond Pike's trucks from reaching Mill Creek Bridge before I had the county records in order. The panel was old, dented, and heavy. The kind my father had used to move calves between pastures, and seeing it stretched across the lane made Red Hollow look less like a farm and more like a line someone was daring me to defend. Behind me, the road curved down toward the creek, where the wooden bridge waited in the mist, quiet and vulnerable, as if it could feel the day coming for it. Deputy Cole was younger than I expected, maybe 30, tall and lean, in a brown county uniform, with tired eyes that belonged to a man who had handled too many neighbor disputes that started with lawn flags and ended with lawyers. He looked first at the broken gate chain, then at the fresh HOA sign still bolted to my fence post, then at Marjorie. He did not wait for him to ask anything. She moved toward him with her folder open, speaking in that polished clubhouse voice, telling him I had blocked a recognized community road, endangered Pine Ridge families, interfered with emergency access, and created a public safety hazard by putting a barrier in front of a route the HOA had maintained for years. I watched Deputy Cole listen. I watched Marjorie perform. She tilted her chin just enough to make every sentence feel like an accusation, and whenever she pointed toward my bridge, her pink sleeve cut through the fog like a warning flare. Raymond Pike stood behind her beside his pickup, arms crossed over a gray work shirt, his jaw working around a piece of gum. 2 HOA maintenance men lingered near the sign, pretending not to stare at the cattle panel. They had come expecting a frightened landowner, maybe an angry one. What they found was a man who had spent half the night with his dead father's files spread across a barn workbench. Marjorie handed the deputy her glossy HOA map, newsletters, board minutes, and a printed emergency access diagram with my farm road highlighted in green. She said the residents had relied on this road long enough that removing access would create immediate hardship. She said the HOA had collected funds for upkeep and had every intention of improving the road for everyone's safety. She said, "My refusal to cooperate showed hostility toward the neighborhood, toward families, toward public welfare." Every word was built to make me look smaller than the paper in her hands. I did not answer right away. I opened my father's leather bag slowly, the zipper rough under my fingers, and pulled out the county-stamped survey first. Then the 1,988 bridge permit. Then the inspection record identifying Mill Creek Bridge as a private agricultural bridge. Then the 2004 temporary access agreement. Then the termination clause that ended that access 18 months later and barred the developer, any successor, or any HOA from converting it into a permanent route. I laid each document across the hood of my truck, one by one, with the corners held down by lug nuts from the toolbox, because the morning wind kept trying to lift them. Deputy Cole leaned over the papers without expression. Marjorie kept talking for a few seconds, but her voice thinned when she realized he was no longer looking at her map. He read the bridge permit first, then the survey, then the access agreement. His fingers stopped on the clause my father had underlined in blue ink years ago. No permanent easement created. No transfer of access rights. No inclusion in community governance documents. The words sat there in the open air, ugly and clean. The deputy turned to Marjorie and asked for the HOA's deeded easement, recorded access agreement, county approval, bridge use permit, or any document showing legal authority over the road or bridge. For the first time since I had met her, Marjorie Blake blinked like a person who had been handed a question she did not control. She reached into her folder and produced the HOA map again. Then a welcome packet from Pine Ridge Estates. Then a resident newsletter from 7 years earlier, with a smiling photo of families walking along my fence line during a community nature morning. Deputy Cole did not raise his voice. That made what he said hit harder. He explained that an internal HOA map could not make private property public, that a newsletter could not create an easement, and that long use by residents did not give the association authority to widen, control, collect fees for, or send equipment over a private farm bridge without recorded rights. He looked toward Raymond Pike when he said that moving machinery past the barrier could expose everyone involved to trespass, property damage, and possible criminal mischief if the bridge was harmed. Raymond stopped chewing. Marjorie's face hardened. The pink suit suddenly looked too bright for the silence around her. She told Deputy Cole he was misunderstanding the risk, that residents would blame his department if fire trucks could not reach the back of the subdivision during an emergency. The words were clever, dangerous words, the kind that pushed responsibility onto someone else before anything had happened. For a moment, I saw Deputy Cole's jaw tighten, because no officer wants his name attached to a blocked emergency route, even if that route exists only on an HOA projector screen. Then a voice came from the fence line. Tom Avery was walking up from the direction of the lower pasture, one hand gripping a crooked wooden cane, the other holding an old photo album against his ribs. Tom was 76, narrow-shouldered, white-bearded, wearing a faded brown jacket and a sweat-stained ball cap from the feed store. He had lived across Mill Creek longer than Pine Ridge had existed, and his knees made every step look like a negotiation with pain. But his eyes were clear, and when he stopped beside my truck, the entire roadside seemed to make room for him. Tom opened the album on the hood beside the legal papers. The plastic sleeves were yellowed, but the photographs were sharp enough. My father stood in one of them in 1988, younger and broader, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, one boot planted on a raw timber beam above muddy creek water. Beside him were Tom, 2 county workers, and a half-built bridge frame with no Pine Ridge, no clubhouse, no HOA road sign, anywhere in sight. In another photo, my mother stood near the pasture fence with me as a boy on her hip, both of us watching the bridge go up under a hard summer sky. I did not expect that picture. It hit me so hard I had to look away. My mother had died before Pine Ridge was even finished, and grief had a strange way of hiding in ordinary paper until it found the right morning to step out. Lydia had texted me twice, asking if I needed her to come, but I had told her to stay at school. Now I wished she were beside me, Because the sight of Dad on that beam and Mom in that field made the whole fight feel bigger than a road. Marjorie was not just renaming land. She was stepping on the last visible parts of people who could no longer defend themselves. Tom told Deputy Cole he had watched Harlan Mercer build the bridge after the flood, watched him pay for it, watched him repair it, watched Pine Ridge trucks use it only because Harlan had given temporary permission when the subdivision was under construction. His voice was rough but steady. He said Harlan had warned him years ago that kindness can turn into a claim if the wrong people inherit the favor. Marjorie gave a sharp little laugh at that, but nobody joined her. That was the moment Grace Nolan appeared at the far edge of the road, standing beside her blue minivan with her phone held low in one hand. Her son was not with her this time. Her face looked pale, conflicted, and scared in a way that made me notice her before Marjorie did. Grace's eyes moved from the deputy to the papers, to Marjorie's folder. She did not come closer. She looked like someone who had heard something she was not supposed to hear and had not yet decided whether courage was worth the cost. Deputy Cole finished photographing my documents for his report. He told Marjorie the cattle panel could stay until ownership and access were resolved through civil channels, and that no HOA personnel should cross the barrier, remove signs, touch the bridge, or direct residents through my road. Marjorie smiled at him, but it was no longer smooth. It was a small, flat thing filled with heat. She gathered her papers, turned without speaking to me, and walked back to the Cadillac. She did not know Grace had followed her to the clubhouse later that afternoon. She did not know Grace paused outside the cracked side door and heard her on speakerphone with Raymond Pike. She did not know Grace's hand was shaking when she opened the voice recorder on her phone. Marjorie's voice came through clear enough, low and furious, telling Raymond to have equipment ready by morning, to bring gravel, posts, and a crew before Caleb could get a lawyer. Because the HOA needed to restore community access before the residents lost confidence, I did not learn about the recording until evening. By then, the sun had dropped behind the ridge, and the bridge had turned black against the Silver Creek. I was in the barn, putting Dad's papers back into order, when my phone rang from a number I did not know. The woman on the line introduced herself as Evelyn Brooks. A county land use attorney, Lydia, had reached through a school board contact. Her voice was calm, precise, and too serious for small talk. She said she had reviewed the documents Lydia sent. Then she paused in a way that made the barn feel colder. Quote, "If the records were accurate," she said, "the road was not the biggest problem for Pine Ridge Estates. Their entire rear emergency exit, the one printed in their safety plan and sold to residents as protection, depended on a private bridge they had no legal right to use." The engine noise came before daylight fully touched the pasture. It started low beyond the ridge, a growl behind the trees, then multiplied into the heavy clatter of trucks, chains, and metal ramps, until the whole farm seemed to wake with its teeth clenched. By the time I stepped onto the porch, Raymond Pike's convoy was already turning off the county road, and Marjorie Blake was standing near Mill Creek Bridge in her pink suit, like she had arrived to supervise an execution. The morning was cold enough to turn my breath white. Fog lay over the lower pasture in torn ribbons, and the creek below the bridge moved black and slow beneath the wooden planks. Raymond's first truck carried fresh gravel. Behind it came a flatbed, hauling a compact excavator. Its yellow arm folded like a sleeping animal waiting to be released. Two pickups followed with men in orange vests, fence tools, steel posts, and rolls of survey ribbon. They did not look like neighbors. They looked like an invasion, dressed as maintenance. I had not slept much after Evelyn Brooks called. Her words had stayed with me in the dark. Pine Ridge's rear emergency exit depended on a private bridge. They had no legal right to use. That kind of truth did not bring comfort. It brought danger. A desperate HOA president could walk away from a bad map, but a president who had sold safety plans, collected fees, and promised emergency access on land she did not own had much more to lose than pride. So before sunrise, I had walked the fence line with a flashlight and mounted 3 trail cameras in the cedars, each one aimed at the road, the cattle panel, and the bridge approach. Then I called Deputy Cole. Then I called Evelyn. Then I put my father's papers into the leather bag and stood at the mouth of the bridge. Marjorie saw me before Raymond did. Her chin rose, and even from 50 yards away, I could feel the contempt in her face. Her short white hair sat perfectly against her jaw, Her bright pink jacket buttoned cleanly over a white blouse, her heels planted in the wet dirt, as if mud had no right to touch her. She lifted one hand, and the gravel truck rolled forward. Not fast, but steady, the way a man moves when he has been told the other side will not really stop him. I stepped into the center of the road and raised my palm. The truck stopped 10 feet from me with a hiss of brakes. The driver stared through the windshield, both hands tight on the wheel. Raymond climbed down from the flatbed, sunglasses already on, though the sun had barely cleared the trees. He walked toward the cattle panel with bolt cutters in his hand. Moving like this was all just a delay in a job he intended to finish before lunch. Marjorie followed him, her folder tucked under one arm, her mouth pulled into a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. She said the HOA was restoring community access. She said I had forced their hand. She said the bridge had been represented to residents as shared infrastructure for years, and that my personal feelings did not outweigh the safety of 62 homes. Her words were loud enough for the workers to hear, loud enough for anyone filming to think she sounded reasonable, but her eyes kept sliding toward the trail camera mounted in the cedar, and I knew she had seen it. I told Raymond to put the bolt cutters down. He kept walking. The metal jaws opened around the chain on the cattle panel, and for 1 second, the entire farm held still. I could hear water slipping under the bridge. I could hear a crow calling from the far fence. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then a sheriff's cruiser turned into the farm entrance, followed by a dark county SUV. Raymond froze with the bolt cutters still touching the chain. Deputy Aaron Cole stepped out first, hat low, face tight with the kind of controlled anger men in uniform, save for people who ignore clear warnings. Evelyn Brooks got out of the county SUV behind him. She was in her early 50s, tall and composed, with silver-streaked dark hair tied at the back of her neck, wearing a navy coat over a plain work dress, and carrying a legal folder thick enough to make Marjorie's glossy packet look like a church bulletin. A county bridge engineer climbed out after her, a compact man named Dennis Hall, wearing a reflective vest, steel-toe boots, and the expression of someone who hated surprises before breakfast. Bridge. Mun. Deputy Cole ordered the crew to stop work. No one moved. Then he said it again, slower, and Raymond lowered the bolt cutters. Marjorie's face flushed beneath her makeup, but she recovered quickly. She turned toward Evelyn with a bright, controlled smile and began explaining that Pine Ridge Estates had an obligation to maintain access for residents, that this was not construction, but safety restoration, that Caleb Mercer had created a hazard by blocking a known route. Evelyn did not argue with her. She asked Dennis Hall to inspect the bridge. That simple request changed the whole shape of the morning. Dennis walked past me with a clipboard, knelt at the first plank, checked the side rail, looked underneath at the footings, photographed the load limit plate, half hidden beneath a strip of weathered wood, and crouched near the east support where creek moisture had darkened the beams. Raymond watched him with growing impatience. Marjorie watched him like she wanted to command the bridge itself to cooperate. Dennis stood up after 10 minutes and looked at Deputy Cole. He said the bridge was permitted as a private agricultural bridge for farm equipment and light service vehicles, not for loaded gravel trucks, excavators, or repeated HOA maintenance traffic. He said forcing heavy equipment over it, without engineering review, could compromise the deck and possibly damage the support beams. He said if Raymond's flatbed had crossed with the excavator, the county would have had a structural incident instead of a property dispute. For the first time, the workers backed away from the bridge. Marjorie heard that and changed tactics instantly. Her voice sharpened. She pointed toward the rooftops of Pine Ridge beyond the trees and said I was putting families at risk, that I was blocking the only rear exit those families had been told they could use during flood, fire, or medical emergency. She said it with enough emotion that 2 Pine Ridge residents who had gathered at the fence nodded uneasily. Fear was her favorite tool, because fear made people stop asking who created the danger. Then Grace Nolan stepped forward from behind her blue minivan. She looked smaller than everyone else there, a mother in a gray cardigan with tired eyes, and one hand wrapped around her phone like it might burn her. But when she pressed play, Marjorie's own voice came out of the speaker, clear in the cold air. The recording captured Marjorie, telling Raymond to bring equipment before I could get a lawyer. Then it captured something worse, her admitting that the bridge fee had always been absorbed into broader community improvements, and that there was no reason to send money to Mercer for a bridge residents already believed was ours. Nobody spoke. The silence that followed felt bigger than the trucks, bigger than the law, bigger than the bridge. A man from Pine Ridge took off his baseball cap and stared at Marjorie like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. A woman near the fence whispered that she had paid that fee every year since moving in. Another resident asked where the money had gone, not loudly, but with the kind of hurt that spreads faster than shouting. Grace's hand trembled, but she did not lower the phone. Marjorie looked at Grace with pure disbelief, as if betrayal was only possible when done to her. Then she turned back to Evelyn and tried to rebuild the wall before it collapsed. She said the HOA had acted in good faith. She said the fee language had been misunderstood. She said Caleb's refusal to cooperate had escalated a manageable issue into a public safety crisis. But Evelyn opened her folder and laid one document on the hood of Deputy Cole's cruiser, the county-approved Pine Ridge evacuation plan. It showed one official emergency route, the front entrance on Ridge Hollow Road. My farm road was not on it. Mill Creek Bridge was not on it. Emergency access route B existed only in HOA materials. That was the moment Marjorie stopped smiling. I walked to the cattle panel, removed the old chain, and replaced it with a new hardened steel one I had bought before dawn. I pulled it tight through the gate bracket my father had welded years ago. Then I lifted the wooden sign Lydia had painted the night before, the letters dark against fresh cedar, and bolted it to the post beside the bridge approach. Private farm bridge. No HOA access, without written permission. The workers loaded their tools without being told. Raymond would not look at me. Deputy Cole stayed beside the road until the last truck backed away from the pasture. Marjorie stood alone near the creek, pink suit bright against the mud, her face stiff, her eyes fixed on my father's bridge, like it had personally humiliated her. And as I locked the gate, my phone buzzed with a new message from Grace. It was a photo from inside the Pine Ridge clubhouse office. A ledger page, 11 years of bridge fees, and besides several withdrawals, one handwritten note. Mem. Clap. Blake Authorization Clubhouse Renovation Fund. By 7 that evening, Pine Ridge Estates looked less like a neighborhood and more like a jury waiting for a verdict. Porch lights glowed behind perfect hedges. SUVs lined both sides of the clubhouse parking lot, and through the tall front windows I could see Marjorie Blake standing beneath a projector screen, with my farm road blown up behind her in bright green. She had put my land on display like a crime scene, and every chair in that room faced her as if she were the only person allowed to tell people what they were afraid of. I parked beside Lydia's Subaru, and sat for a moment, with both hands on the wheel. The clubhouse was all polished stone, warm lights, and expensive landscaping, the kind of place built to make rules feel respectable. Behind it, beyond the tennis courts and trimmed pines, Red Hollow Farm sat in the dark with a broken gate, a locked bridge, and my father's papers resting in the leather bag on the seat beside me. I had spent the day thinking about that ledger Grace had photographed, about 11 years of bridge fees, about my father paying repair bills while the HOA sold his bridge as a community asset. Grief had turned into something heavier now. Not rage, responsibility. Lydia stood by the entrance waiting for me, her arms crossed against the cold, her face pale but steady. Tom Avery was beside her in his old brown jacket, leaning on his cane with the photo album tucked under one arm. Evelyn Brooks arrived seconds later in her county SUV, carrying a folder thick with copies, and Deputy Aaron Cole stepped out of his cruiser near the curb, not there to take sides, only to make sure Pine Ridge did not mistake anger for permission. When we walked toward the clubhouse together, conversations inside thinned, faces turned. A few residents looked away like they had been caught watching a neighbor's house burn. Marjorie saw us enter and smiled with the calm violence of a woman refusing to lose in public. Her bright pink suit was sharper than it had been at the bridge, pressed clean, heels shining, short white hair tucked behind one ear. On the table in front of her sat binders labeled Community Road Legal Response, each one stacked neatly beside a ballot sheet. Raymond Pike stood near the side wall, arms folded, trying to look like a contractor, and not like a man who had almost driven an excavator onto a bridge that could have failed under him. The room smelled of coffee, carpet cleaner, and panic hidden under perfume. Marjorie began before we had fully taken our seats. Her voice filled the room smoothly, thanking residents for coming on short notice, reminding them that community safety required unity, warning them that one hostile landowner was attempting to erase a long-standing access route used by families, service providers, and emergency planning materials. Behind her, the projector showed my road labeled Emergency Access Route B, the green line crossing Mill Creek Bridge, like a vein cut through my farm. She said Pine Ridge could not allow intimidation to decide infrastructure. She said the board would vote that night to authorize legal action against me. For a few seconds, the old version of me wanted to stand up and tear that map off the screen. But I could feel Lydia beside me, still as stone. I could feel Tom's cane resting against my boot. I could hear my father's warning from the letter in the safe. Do not argue at the road. Open the county file first. So I waited until Marjorie invited comments with the expression of someone expecting applause. Then I stood and carried my father's leather bag to the front table. I did not raise my voice. I placed the county stamped survey beneath the projector camera, and my farm boundaries appeared on the screen, black ink replacing Marjorie's green fantasy. I placed the 1988 private agricultural bridge permit beside it. Then the bridge inspection record. Then the 2004 temporary construction access agreement. Then the termination clause, ending that access before Pine Ridge Estates had finished selling its last homes. Quote, 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 quote. I placed my father's repair receipts on top of the stack, the final one from 7 months before his death, paid in full by Caleb Mercer. Then Tom opened his photo album and slid the picture of my father standing on the unfinished bridge into the light. The room changed in a way no vote could control. People leaned forward. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Someone whispered my father's name because they remembered seeing him drive his old blue pickup past their subdivision for years, never knowing he owned the road their HOA had renamed. On the screen, Caleb Mercer stood young and broad-shouldered on a raw timber beam above muddy creek water, sleeves rolled up, hands dark with work. I saw my father become human to them, not an obstacle, not an old signature. A man. Marjorie cut in quickly, saying historic ownership did not erase current resident dependence. She said the documents were complicated, that civil access could still arise from long use, that the HOA had acted in good faith based on maps provided to homeowners. Evelyn Brooks stepped forward before Marjorie could turn confusion back into fear. Evelyn's voice stayed calm, but every sentence landed clean. She explained that the county had no record of public dedication, no recorded easement, no emergency approval for the farm road, no bridge use authorization, and no permit allowing Pine Ridge to widen, improve, control, or collect maintenance money for Mill Creek Bridge. Then she placed the official evacuation plan on the projector. There was only one approved exit: Ridge Hollow Road. A low murmur rolled through the clubhouse. People looked at Marjorie, then at the screen, then at one another. The fear she had used against me suddenly turned around and faced her. If there had only ever been one official emergency route, then Pine Ridge had not been protected by my bridge. They had been sold the comfort of a lie. That was when Grace Nolan stood up. She was near the back, wearing the same gray cardigan I had seen at the road, her hair pulled back, her face tight with the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a hard truth all day. She held a folder in one hand and her phone in the other. Her voice shook at first, but she did not sit down. She told the room she had paid the bridge maintenance fee every year because she believed it kept an emergency route safe for her son. She said she had trusted the HOA, because that was what a single mother did when she did not have time to question every line on every bill. Then she held up printed copies of the ledger page, the one showing withdrawals marked under Marjorie's authorization and routed to clubhouse renovation expenses. No one interrupted her. Grace said the money had been taken in the name of safety, but had never gone to the Mercer Bridge. She said Caleb Mercer had paid repairs himself, while Pine Ridge residents were charged for a bridge they did not own. Her voice broke on that last part, and the room went painfully quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes viewers comment, because everyone watching knows exactly what betrayal looks like when ordinary people finally realize they were used. Alan Whitcomb, the HOA treasurer, stood from the board table like the floor had become unstable beneath him. He was a thin man in his late 60s with nervous hands, wire-frame glasses, and a beige cardigan buttoned crookedly over a collared shirt. I had seen him once at the feed store, apologizing to the cashier for taking too long to count change. He looked terrified of Marjorie, and for a moment, I thought he would sit back down. But then he removed his glasses and admitted the bridge maintenance fee had been pooled into a broader community improvement account. He said it had paid for the clubhouse, entry arch, decorative stonework, new signage, and landscaping contracts. He said Marjorie had told him the bridge was covered by legacy access and that separate accounting was unnecessary. Marjorie turned on him so fast, her chair scraped the floor. She said Alan was mischaracterizing board procedure. She said he had approved the budgets. She said everyone in that room had benefited from improvements, but her control was slipping. Residents began asking questions from every side. How much had been collected? Who authorized the withdrawals? Why was the farm road printed in safety packets if the county never approved it? Why were families told the bridge was maintained? Why had Raymond been sent with equipment before a legal review? Raymond stared at the carpet. Evelyn stated plainly that I had grounds to seek a temporary restraining order, damages for unauthorized commercial use of my property, reimbursement claims tied to misrepresented maintenance, and an order forcing Pine Ridge to cease advertising my road or bridge as community infrastructure. Deputy Cole added that any resident, contractor, or board member who crossed my locked barrier without permission after formal notice could face trespass enforcement, and any damage to the bridge could become a criminal matter. He did not dramatize it. He did not need to. The vote Marjorie had prepared died before it reached the ballots. One board member withdrew the motion to sue me. Another asked for an emergency financial review. A third, a retired nurse named Patricia Bell, requested a new vote to suspend Marjorie's authority, pending an independent audit. Marjorie stood beneath the projector light, her pink suit glowing against the false green line on the map behind her. And for the first time all night, she looked less like a president than a person trapped inside her own paperwork. I gathered my father's documents and slid them back into the leather bag. I should have felt victory. Instead, I felt the ache of the empty farmhouse, the broken gate, the years my father had carried this quietly, while people smiled at him over fences. As residents raised their hands to second the motion against Marjorie, I looked at the old photograph still on the table, at Dad, standing on that unfinished bridge, with mud on his boots and sunlight on his shoulders. Then the clubhouse doors opened behind us. A county clerk stepped inside holding a sealed envelope addressed to Pine Ridge Estates, HOA, and Red Hollow Farm, and Evelyn's face changed the moment she saw the stamp. She opened it under the lobby light, read the first page, and looked back at me with an expression I could not read. The county had found a second file. The second file did not clear the room. It froze it. Evelyn held the sealed county envelope under the clubhouse light, and the projector behind Marjorie still showed my farm road as a green public vein, while every resident in Pine Ridge sat waiting for a truth none of us had known existed. When Evelyn read the first page, her eyes moved once toward Marjorie, and that single look did more damage than any accusation could have. The file was from 2013, 12 years earlier, before I ever came home, before my father's hands had begun to shake, before Marjorie had learned to stand in front of crowded rooms and bend fear into obedience. Pine Ridge Estates had applied to the county to list my farm road as an official secondary emergency exit. The application had been rejected. The reason was printed in plain black letters on county stationery. Mill Creek Bridge was private agricultural infrastructure, owned by Caleb Mercer, and the HOA had no recorded right to use it, alter it, maintain it, or present it to residents as approved emergency access. For a moment, even the air conditioner seemed to stop. Residents turned toward Marjorie slowly, not with outrage at first, but with something worse for her: recognition. Alan Whitcomb sank back into his chair, as if his bones had been cut loose. Quote, end quote. Grace Nolan stood near the back with her phone lowered now, her face wet with tears she was trying not to show. Lydia's hand found my arm, and her fingers tightened hard enough to remind me I was not alone in that room. Marjorie did not collapse. People like her rarely do. She straightened the front of her pink suit, lifted her chin, and said the rejection letter was old, incomplete, probably based on outdated conditions, and irrelevant to the current board's obligation to protect residents. But her voice had lost its shine. The room had heard enough. Evelyn turned the next page and found the signature line showing the HOA had received formal notice in 2013, and beneath it, a handwritten internal note from the board archive. Do not circulate to residents until alternative language is prepared. That was the hidden truth Marjorie could not outtalk. Pine Ridge had not misunderstood the bridge. Someone had known. Someone had buried the warning, softened the language, renamed the road, and kept billing residents for a bridge that Harlan Mercer kept safe out of his own pocket. My father had not been stubborn. He had been surrounded by people willing to let his quietness become their permission. The vote that followed did not feel like a meeting anymore. It felt like a dam breaking. The motion to sue me died without a single hand raised in its favor. Patricia Bell, the retired nurse on the board, stood with a trembling paper cup in her hand and moved to suspend Marjorie Blake's authority immediately, terminate Raymond Pike's roadwork contract, freeze all bridge-related accounts, and hire an independent auditor. This time, the room did not murmur. It answered. Hands went up across rows of chairs, one after another, neighbors looking at each other with shame, anger, and the strange relief that comes when a lie finally stops, requiring their participation. Marjorie stood beneath the wrong map until the vote was recorded. No one applauded. No one shouted at her. That was what made it final. She was not chased out by a mob. She was removed by the same community she had used as a shield. When she walked toward the doors, her heels clicked across the clubhouse floor with a lonely, brittle sound. At the threshold, she paused once and looked back at me, and for the first time, there was no smile, no polished insult, no confidence. Just a woman realizing that power borrowed from fear always comes due. The weeks after that moved slower, but cleaner. Raymond Pike was dismissed from all HOA work before sunrise the next morning. The illegal road widening plan was canceled. The fake community road signs came down under Deputy Cole's supervision, stacked in the back of an HOA maintenance truck like evidence nobody wanted to touch. Pine Ridge hired an outside auditor from Knoxville, and Alan Whitcomb, nervous and pale but finally honest, handed over every ledger, invoice, transfer record, and board note tied to the bridge maintenance fee. Grace Nolan was appointed to a new financial transparency committee, not because she wanted power, but because she had learned what happened when ordinary people stopped checking the people who claimed to protect them. The settlement came 3 Fridays later at the county office. I sat at a long wooden table with Evelyn on one side and Lydia on the other. Across from us sat the temporary HOA board, Grace, Alan, Patricia Bell, and 2 residents who looked embarrassed every time they said my name. Marjorie was there only because the agreement required her signature. She wore a darker suit that day, not pink, and her white hair looked less like a crown than a shield she no longer trusted. The terms were simple enough for my father to have appreciated. Red Hollow Farm Road remained private property. Mill Creek Bridge remained the private property of the Mercer family. Pine Ridge could not advertise, map, mark, bill, improve, widen, control, or use either one without written permission. The bridge fee would be returned to residents or placed into a transparent emergency infrastructure fund by household choice. Every resident would receive a corrected safety plan using the county-approved entrance on Ridge Hollow Road. I also agreed to something Evelyn told me I did not have to agree to. In a real emergency, fire, ambulance, or rescue vehicles could cross Mill Creek Bridge if the county requested access directly and documented it afterward. Not through the HOA, not through Marjorie, not through a glossy map. Through the county, in writing. Because I was not trying to punish families for what their board had done. My father had never built that bridge to be cruel. He built it because water rises, roads wash out, cattle get trapped, and sometimes people need a way across. Marjorie signed last. Her public apology was typed on Pine Ridge letterhead, but the hand that signed it shook. She apologized to the Mercer family for misrepresenting private property, to the residents for collecting fees under false assumptions, and to Harlan Mercer by name for allowing his bridge to be used as a financial line item while he carried the repair burden alone. I read that sentence twice. I did not forgive her for everything in that moment, but I felt something in my chest loosen, not for her sake, but for Dad's. By late November, the bridge was repaired again, this time on my terms. I used part of the settlement money to replace weathered decking, reinforce the rails, and install a proper wait sign at the approach. Tom Avery came by with his cane and the old photograph of my father from 1988. He handed it to me without ceremony, because old men from farm country do not dress grief up if they can help it. Lydia framed it in oak and hung it in the kitchen above the table, where morning light could touch Dad's face every day. The last scene of it all came on a cold golden afternoon, when the fields were the color of dry honey and Mill Creek carried fallen leaves under the bridge. Lydia had made a new cedar sign, hand-painted with black letters, and I bolted it to the post where Marjorie's false sign had been. Mercer Farm Bridge, built by Harlan Mercer, 1988. Grace Nolan stood by the fence with a few Pine Ridge residents, quiet but respectful. Deputy Cole leaned against his cruiser. Tom sat on a folding chair with his cane across his knees. No one crossed the bridge. No one needed to. They only watched while my father's name returned to the place it belonged. When the final bolt tightened, I stepped back onto the wooden planks and looked down the road. Red Hollow Farm stretched behind me, rough and scarred and still mine. Pine Ridge sat beyond the trees. No longer an enemy in my mind, just a neighborhood learning that community cannot be built by taking what belongs to someone else. The wind moved over the creek, lifted the edge of my flannel, and for one clear second, I could almost see my father standing at the far rail, younger than memory, hands resting on the wood he had built. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the bridge until the sun dropped behind the ridge. The road was quiet. The false sign was gone. And for the first time since I came home, Red Hollow Farm did not feel like something I had inherited from the dead. It felt like something I had protected for the living. The lesson is simple. Sometimes people will call something community when it was never theirs to take. In everyday life, kindness should never become an excuse for others to cross your boundaries. Help people when you can, but keep your truth, your records, and your dignity protected. A good community is built on respect, not pressure. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs the reminder. Leave a comment with where you are watching from, and subscribe for more stories like this. God bless you and your family.